So, hello everybody. Hello from home, where we are all hopefully in a good place and state. Thank you for inviting me to speak at Doing Feminisms, even though I expected to be a little bit different, but we all know we need to improvise. So I'm also improvising my first online talk in this kind of setting of pre-recording. So if there are any hiccups, please excuse me. Yes, thank you also already for sending me questions about Queerbase, what we do, how we came to being, and what is our idea of activism and political work that has a very much the idea of supporting more than helping refugees. So let me just begin with my presentation, and I hope I can get through this in a smooth way. So put everything away that we don't need. My name is Marti Huber. I'm from Queerbase, Welcome and Support for LGBTIQ Refugees. And this is a Viennese-based organization that was founded during the last, I would say, 5.5 years. Started out in a context, a network within the Viennese LGBTIQ community that already existed, that was trying to support queer refugees that would come to Vienna. And it then, starting with the end of 2014, culminated more in a more structural idea to become also more a professionalized organization. And as you can imagine, even though we started already at the end of 2014, you can imagine that then with 2015, the impact of August 2015 and the new people that were coming to seek safety in Austria, that it kind of developed a certain dynamic. So even though we are now in this weird situation of isolation, it's still good to think about how different minorities, and in our case, sexual minorities, are doing in Austria when they are seeking protection. So what can we expect in the next few minutes? It's a question of how norms in the asylum laws and how also the current situation, but also the situation for queer refugees when they come to Austria has changed through the work of Queerbase. So we will think a little bit about norms, language, structures, infrastructures in especially. Let me just check the time so I know when I started. So when we think about norms and legal systems, and I'm definitely not so in the language of law and so on, even though I tried to learn as much as possible in the last few years, the thing is that LGBTIQ refugees are not mentioned as a reason for flight in the Genevan Convention, but in the more general assumption of social group. So if you are a member of the social group of a sexual minority, you can be granted asylum if you can prove your persecution. So you might know that in different countries, and it's about 70 countries in the world where LGBTIQ or sexual minorities are being criminalized, that there has been quite a development in the acknowledgement of this social group of LGBTIQ refugees that has been quite important and has made big successes also in the last few 30 years, I would say. And it's quite interesting that Austria has not been in the last bunch of countries that started to acknowledge this kind of reason. But I also found already a positive case asylum procedure from an Iranian gay guy in the early 80s. And with, I would say, the mid-90s, Austria already had more and more cases of acknowledged queer refugees. So we see that the norms and the legal basis have been becoming more and more precise in how to acknowledge and grant asylum for so-called SOGI, sexual orientation, gender identity refugees. But what we will also have to see is this question of believability. So how can somebody prove that they are, in fact, a member of the social group, which is sometimes really hard. And this is where we come to the question of language. And this is, for me, a starting point, even though we could start at many different entrances into this field of settings and structures and so on. So as you can imagine, not everybody who is a lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans or inter is an activist who is fighting for their rights in their home countries, is outspoken, has proven interviews with press and media, or has their own Facebook accounts or other stuff where they do their activism. It's the opposite. Many live a life of hiding their sexuality, trying to come by with the psychological and physical problems that they face within their families, their communities, and their states. So finding a language in this whole set is quite an obstacle for many. And this is kind of crucial also when it comes to the question of vulnerability and standing up for yourself with your own vulnerability when you come to a country where you seek asylum. So one of the major questions that we faced before or during the founding time was: are people safe? Are queer refugees safe when they come to Austria in the asylum system? And they were not. But we will find that later in my notes. So I would like to start with a little video from a talk from Gayatri Spivak, where she talks about building infrastructures for subaltern people. Subaltern, she explains, I think, enough to understand what she means. It's quite a big term, but people who don't have access to the structures of the state or the communities they live in a very general way. So this is something that I find is a good basis to understand what she is trying to say also about how these kind of structures need to be set up when they don't want to be paternalistic. So let's go to Gayatri Spivak.
Let me say something about the idea of subaltern voices. The word voice there is a metaphorical word. What we mean by attending to the subaltern classes is what they do speak, they resist, they form collectives, but there is no infrastructure for, again, to go back to the metaphor, for them to have their speech act completed. In other words, those around them with the power, the state power or non-state power, do not have the infrastructure to be able to attend to these things. Yes, now I could give you countless examples, but that would take a very long time. So it's not a question of someone trying literally to listen to muted voices. That's a metaphorical description of building infrastructure so that the citizen who is cut off from the structures of the state or social mobility can actually access them. That's what it is. It's not like top-down help.
Yeah, so this is quite an important question that she states there, is how can we build infrastructures that are not only top-down when we see that there is not a fair access to the asylum procedure, when people who come here, who are members of the social group, do not feel safe in Austria. And so this would be one of the questions that you also stated. Why is it, what was also the motivation or the reason why Queerbase was founded, and what was quite a basis for our work. That is the notion that people who come here and apply for asylum already, when they are at the police to talk to an officer there, are confronted with somebody in uniform, are confronted with interpreters that are dolmetsching, very often are not very well educated in the art of interpreting, but also come from their home countries very often, where they are really afraid to talk openly about their reasons of flight. And then it goes on with being in shelters where they again live with people they might have fled from, which they don't really know. It could be okay, but very often they are very afraid that the people who they live with will be prejudiced, will be assaulting them, will be molesting them. And in fact, this is part of our experience and the things that people told us, that not only being afraid of assault would be enough reason for them to have better housing, for example, but that there were a lot of attacks and, for example, sexual harassment and so on for LGBTIQ refugees. So also in general, at the moment, there is, on a European level, the attempt to bring LGBTIQ refugees also in the so-called group of vulnerable refugees, which are usually unaccompanied minors, people with handicaps, pregnant women, people who are victims of torture or trafficking. But so this is something that is still ongoing and has been quite a discussion, and also a thing that we tried to push, that there is an acknowledgement on the European level. So this is one of the big reasons to find and to provide safe housing for people, which means that we started to do a cooperation first with Diakonie Lares, they already provided flats, apartments for families that were in the asylum procedure. And we started a project with them where they provided flats for LGBTIQ refugees. This means that there are now group apartments for gay people, for gay men or lesbian women or trans people, inter people, in this kind of setting where at least at home, and I know that right now we are in this staying at home question. We know how important it is to feel safe at home. That at least your sexual identity is not anything that you need to hide, that your gender identity is not anything that you need to hide when you are in your private space. And this is also something that is very, very important question, because very often we think that people who come here to do an asylum procedure should be happy that they have a roof over their heads, that they get food, and that they get healthcare. But the question is, what would be a more human or humanitarian way of supporting people who have been heavily traumatized through a long story of persecution? How to not only give them the minimum in our support. So we know, so as you can already see, when we talk about emancipatory spaces, we started at the minimum from our perspective, which is housing, shelter, where people are not being offended, harassed, afraid of being outed, afraid of somebody might see what they got on their phone, what apps they're using, if they read any papers that are queer, and so on. So sometimes it's like this very basic thing that you need to start off with to get to other points, and not to start on a high level of abstraction of, I would say, whatever, queer feminist activism, for example. So landing in the LGBTIQ community is a bigger question also, because for many, they have lived in isolation, all these kind of words that we know right now very well, and to feel alone, and to be without any context. And that means in many ways that even when they came and made it to Austria, which is hard enough, usually refugee communities do have also the community of the same people that came here too. So for example, people from your country, people from your religion, other communities. And this is an access and support system that very often LGBTIQ refugees don't have, because they are very afraid of being harassed again by their own people, of feeling insecure about what they can share of their lives, being, for example, in religious contexts. So they need to navigate all the time through these different communities. And landing in an LGBTIQ community, excuse me, I think there's one image a little bit too much over the writing. So landing in an LGBTIQ community means for many the first time in their lives where they can kind of expect to have a whole acceptance, which we know is also not the truth, because we know that there is Islamophobia, there is racism, and so on within our own community. So there's a lot of different things that we need to tackle. So if you are also asking for a feminist position, how Queerbase is dealing with these questions, I would call it more on a queer feminist or intersectional position, that we really try to tackle these different obstacles queer refugees have from all these sides. So to support different groups on strengthening the idea of being okay, of being a person that is loved, that has every right to live, that can be good and bad as everybody else, but has a certain value like everybody else in the community. So in this sense, we are not only kind of a social counseling or NGO that is organizing these basic things, but also very much in this idea of community work, which is really important for many, that they find places of support also in a peer setting. But I will come to that later, right now. So what was really important for us as Queerbase, because and I think that was easier because we founded ourselves in this very already ongoing big movements of refugees and the refugee protest that already happened a few years ago, and all these other ideas and networks and politicizations of our own contexts. We saw that building a new infrastructure, it needed to be in a sense of a mix of peers from different intensity, I would say. It means that how Queerbase was set up, that there were all members of the LGBTIQ community. Some of them had migrant backgrounds, and some of them also were already queer refugees who went through the system in Austria. So for us, it is really important that everybody who comes and seeks help at Queerbase, that they see that these are people that know about being a sexual minorities from their own experience, and that we speak many languages. So in our team, there's like Russian, Arabic, Farsi, Ethiopian, Aramaic, and French and Spanish speaking and English and so on. And so what is really important for us was also to change the way how we provide language. And one of the key issues, and we started from the beginning to have interpreters in our own group of interpreters that are queer themselves. And I think most of them are refugees themselves. So this one hurdle that is quite big is that people are very afraid to speak openly about their sexual orientation or gender identity in front of people from the same background, people from the same origin, when they don't know if they can trust them. And so for us, it was really important to build that trust through also the idea of a team that is very much intermixed and uses the knowledges and resources in the best way. So yes, Queerbase is not an only self-organization from queer refugees. It's a mixed organization, but it really tries to get the most out of these different privileges people have that are, for example, from Austria and have the right citizenship and so on, and knowledge and resources that people have also from different contexts. So everybody who is interpreting at Queerbase is in fact also queer. So this is also the way we try to organize our structure, is that it is different groups that in their field of expertise, for example, interpretation, decide for themselves what they want to do and how they want to organize. And I think this is also a big difference to other NGOs. We don't have, I mean, we do have a board because we need to, but and the board is really also tried to be as mixed as possible. So we also have this in our statute. But then there are different groups within the organization of Queerbase, for example, the legal advice group and the team, the office like social counseling group, community worker, and so on, that are doing in their field what they think is necessary to do. It's a sociocratic form of organization, which we still try to get better in, but yeah, we have in that sense no bosses. So in case you're wondering who is the boss in Queerbase, there's none. So and peer counseling also means for us to have people that can that are queer, that are coming from the countries of heritage, of origin, and that speak the same language. So yes, we do work with interpretation, but very much we also work with direct counseling, with peer counseling. But sometimes it's also important to do counseling from the other side, from somebody who is from Austria, or who can tell the story also about the villa, for example, which is also a question of you, which I would maybe take a little bit other than it was stated. How is the daily life in the Türkis Rosa Lila Villa? Maybe I would just take one aspect of what it difficulty but importance it also is, that Queerbase is in the Türkis Rosa Lila Villa, which is a community center, in an LGBTIQ community center in Vienna since 1982. And it really, it has a rainbow flag, it is pink, it says what is in there, lesbian and gay and trans house. And so for many people, it is quite a safe harbor to come to. And for me, who has been there since 1996, to tell them, you know, I've heard a lot of stories, I've been an activist here very long. You don't need to be ashamed. This is what we are here for more than 30 years, that people come here to find a place where they can talk about the innermost feelings, their ideas about sexuality, their belongings and desires. So sometimes it's helpful for people that they sit in opposite of me and see that this is a long history of struggles that has been going on, that things have gotten better, that there is a community that is caring and loving and giving you tenderness also, where you can relax and have a moment of being accepted however you are. And so the building as an infrastructure with all this place or possibilities of group meetings, of gatherings, of parties, of having a dance is also quite important, even though it's not a daily life, especially not now. But for many, on the other side, it is a hurdle to get into the building, because it's quite known. They don't want to be seen in the surrounding, and then having this kind of outing through going in the building. So it has its advantages and disadvantages to be in the Türkis Rosa Lila Villa. So what we are also offering in different settings, for example, German classes, a buddy system, art and leisure and sports activities, so that people also can have can get back a sense of the new language that they are trying to learn, of gaining friendships within the Austrian LGBTIQ community, of doing their art, or finding their leisure in sports and so on, in an environment where they can feel like accepted, where the content is also not excluding their experience, and is a possibility to be in in something as a whole person. And that it is very, very important. And maybe this is also some of the questions that that would be going in this question of what are the concepts of critical cultural education. And maybe I have the tendency to make a very broad definition or idea of cultural education that is in a sense a very inclusive, holistic approach. That means that being also in a queer feminist intersectional context, that it is in all these settings on the very basic level, the idea to see how we can build a community that is critical also concerning the problems and troubles we have in ourselves, and how to overcome certain ideas of also hierarchies between refugees and queer refugees themselves also. So, and this is something that is in many ways quite a conflict zone. I would call it more of a conflict zone also, to be aware of racism within our own context, of transphobia within our own context, so that we are not shying away from these troubles, which are sometimes really tough and very nerve-wracking and everything. But to have, with all the respect to the experiences with ours and those the people that they bring, to find a language again, maybe, or to find activities and community that is overcoming these ideas that divide us. And we have tons of divisions in all instances we can think of. So it is like an ongoing process on a very not so much I would not so much say this is kind of a curriculum of critical educational cultural work, but it is like embedded in all the activities and all the idea of reflection and criticism of what do we do and how can we learn from our mistakes? How can we become a fuller, a greater community that we would like to be, which is, as you can imagine, not an easy task. So what we find in many ways is this question of how shame, stigma, and prejudice on the long run have built our community. And that is something that people share in Europe in different intensity, like other people that had to flee their countries, their communities, their families, to find a place where they can be accepted and overcome these feelings of shame, stigma, and prejudice. So, because there was also a question of how families deal with queerness of their kids. This is a very complex issue. So I would like to show you a video from Mosaic. They're an organization, an LGBTIQ organization or sexual minority organization in Beirut. And they did interviews with different refugees also, because a lot of people from the MENA region flee to Lebanon to find a less restrictive environment there. So let me just go there.
مرت الأيام وصارت حياتي مشغولة من أبرز المشاكل يلي مرقت بحياتي هي إنه عائلتي تخلت عني. عشت بمخيم منه آمن.
I stopped this for a second so that you can see the subtitles, because probably not so many of you speak Arabic like me. Let me see if I can.
مرت الأيام وصارت حياتي مجهولة. من أبرز المشاكل يلي مرقت بحياتي هي إنه عائلتي تخلت عني. عشت بمخيم منه آمن طول حياتي مع اضطهاد من قبل والدي وخيي والعيلة والمجتمع، تهديدات منهم بقتل وتصفية دمي. تمرمرت وتعذبت، ما بتذكر ولا شي حلو من عائلتي، وخاصة بيي أنا بشوفه بنظري مجرم للأسف، متسلط، ديكتاتوري. وغير هيك هو دايما بلحقني، بشوفه شبح وين ما بكون. خيي بيستحي فيي لأني ما بشرفه. تعرضت للضرب والأذى من بيي وخيي والجيران، حتى وصلوا ليتخطوا خصوصيتي الحميمة، ولدرجة إنه من بين الأحداث يلي صارت إنه شلحوني تيابي تيثبتوا للمجتمع شو أنا، كيف جسمي. بعدين بالمرحلة الثانوية كنت عم بشتغل بممارسة الجنس لأمن قصة الثانوية، لأن أهلي بهالمرحلة تخلوا عني مادياً. كنت مصرة أنه كفي علمي وحقق طموحي وأثبت حالي. تقدمت لتابع دراستي بالجامعة بإحدى الجامعات، بس رفضت كرمال شكلي، كمان رجعت انتقلت على جامعة تانية، صار معي ذات التجربة. بس أكيد ما استسلمت وكملت ونقلت على جامعة تانية، واعتدوا علي. صار عدة أشياء من بيناتهم، اعتدوا علي بالضرب وتعنفت، وصار عندي اغتصاب وعنف لفظي وجسدي. كانت الإدارة كتير سيئة بتصرفاتها معي، واضطروا إنه يفصلوني من الجامعة، يعتبروا إنه سمعة الجامعة هي الأهم. زائد كنت عم بعمل اختصاص تمريض، رفضت إنه أخد أول سنة مواد الاختصاص يلي بسموها مواد الكورسز، فاجبرت إنه أخد المواد المشتركة بين الطلاب، ووصلت لمرحلة إنه بدي أبدأ تدريب بالمستشفى، فمنعت وجاني رفض تام وانفصلت. أكيد أنا مهدد اليوم من عائلتي والمجتمع، بس دايما في تفاؤل ببكرة أحسن، بأهل وبأصدقاء وبمحيط أفضل. بتمنى حقق طموحي وذاتي وأوصل يلي أنا بدي إياه، كون أنا.
Yeah. So that was a story from a trans woman and her struggles in also finding safety, and also the question of family, how family is also a structure of violence. So let me come back to the question of how it is in Austria and how people who are in the official social support system for refugees, what they are facing when they come here. And this is, I would say, one of the major reasons why also Queerbase has this idea of structural changes, because in the beginning, 2014, we had a lot of refugees, queer refugees that would come from other provinces to Vienna to find support and community. And if you do that, you lose all the access to have a state-funded shelter, healthcare, and so on. So this social system I'm talking about is the so-called Grundversorgung, which you see here in the abbreviation GVS, GVS, Grundversorgung. So if people are in shelters where they cannot be open about their reasons of flight, where they have to hide their stories, that's a big problem for them, and what is usually called minority stress, that in an environment of norms you have not the possibility to be who you are, and you have to hide very important aspects of your life, especially if this is the main point of why you have been seeking asylum. So you come with a baggage of, for example, experienced executed stigma, for example, through state repression, laws against you that from the countries that you came from, and families and communities that have not acknowledged you at the least, or have even gone after you, for example, in mobs that would beat up people if they find out, or even question your sexuality. It doesn't even have to be your identity, so to say. It can also be just supposed that you are gay, and that can be enough in certain environments. And also your communities, your religion, and so on, that is trying to treat you as a sick person, that is trying to heal you through medical, through rituals, and so on, through all these interventions. That is something that is internalized in the bodies and people, in the bodies and minds of the people who come and flee this homo and transphobia. And so people who have this experience of being persecuted, of being belittled, of being attacked, have on the one hand a very long experience of stigma and shame, but at the other hand also try to find ways to manage their risk. So when they come to Austria, they have a certain idea of free emancipatory spaces of the so-called Golden West or North, or however you want to see it. And they try to find out how then they can live a life that they want and desire, which is quite an obstacle, because very often people come and with an astonishing courage try to live whatever they wanted to be out in a way where I'm sometimes wondering how they can make it through the streets. So these kind of ideas of what is a risk in the countries that they are coming from and what is a risk here in Austria, in Vienna, for example, is also quite an opening for vulnerabilities that need to be discussed and decided upon, because for us it is really important that people have the ability to decide for themselves what they want to do, what is a risk for them, and what they are willing to take here now and willing to take in their communities of origin or whatever, in their religion. So and so being in this kind of shelters and camps, it is quite an obstacle also to discuss structural changes, when this idea that I already talked about before is that the minimum of support has to be enough. People should be happy that they're out of war zones, that people don't throw them off buildings. So for them, the idea that people should have a right to private life when they are in a shelter, a right to have sex, for example, which is quite a strange idea when you start to discuss it with the Ministry of Inner Affairs, that you tell them, yes, this is the reason why people fled here, and people who converted to another religion, for example, and they would not be allowed to go to church. We would say, how come they are not allowed to go to church in Austria if this is the reason of flight? So for us, it is quite an importance, this right to private life, which would also need contexts of housing that in all these circumstances provide kind of the possibility, which is also very important. Also that people can live their gender identity, that their pronouns are being accepted, and so on. Also in the way institutions, other NGOs talk to them. And it doesn't matter if it's Caritas, Diakonie, AMS, or some other organizations, that this is a right to be announced in a way, to be spoken to in a way that is respectful. So getting out, so on the one hand, this is this idea of the right to private life, then the idea to have access to the LGBTI community, because this is quite essential also in the whole procedure of proving that you are a member of the social group. If you're sitting somewhere in a valley in Carinthia with no possibility to meet other queer people, it is really much harder for people to prove that they're a member of a social group if you cannot socialize. So this is also quite an important aspect why we are trying to get people from the provinces to Vienna, which got harder and harder because the governments, even before, there's been so many changes in the asylum law that, for example, transfers to Vienna are really hard. And then there's also special medical needs. Just think of trans people who need to have access to hormones if they already took it before they came here, or also other medical needs that inter people have, and so on. Also HIV prevention work or HIV medication. It is much more helpful if this happens in an environment where people feel safe to talk about these needs. I'm not saying that you cannot get good HIV medication anywhere in Austria. This is not the point. But we have to remember that there is people who have a lot of shame and who are heavily stigmatized. And to talk about all these layers is sometimes really hard for them. So this is also, for example, more than just being treated correctly, but also undoing the stigma and undoing the shame with which they came here. So we can build this idea of language, of finding the empowerment and the space of not being afraid to talk about the things at the time that you think you need to talk about. So you can choose yourself, for example, whom to tell your medical needs. And as you can already see, there's also this question of support for ideas of mental health and trauma work that is also quite essential, that we're trying to build a network of LGBTIQ therapists and or LGBTIQ friendly therapists and psychiatrists and other mental health organizations. So there is also a knowledge transfer into different fields. Yeah, maybe before that, because it's also quite a big part of our work, and I don't know if it comes later, but I don't think so. This idea of organizing structural change through education, trainings, workshops. And so, as I said, we have a great team of legal advisors that do this legal work to establish new cases where there are official positive decisions and so on. But on the same time, we need to work these ideas, to work the standards into all these different organizations that are in the field. So what we also do is we work with social workers. We did a workshop for judges from the administrative court. We try, to do work with UNHCR, with human rights organizations and so on, to get a field of discourse that is also aware of the special vulnerability of LGBTIQ refugees, so that you can build bigger and stronger alliances and have bigger and stronger networks. So coming to the end, I would like to point to a quote from Judith Butler, from her book Precarious Life. And because all this question of trauma and stigma, we see that there is a lot of experience of rupture and big pain. And so it is also a question that you stated, what are resources that we can also get to. And it's not only, the experience of having been activist for quite a long time, but also to understand and that the capacity to mourn is also keeping us awake in a way that we see, where we can involved in the sense of affect and emotion, where mourning is part of it, but where we can, from this, gain a sensibility of the precariousness of life, that we see that we need to network and gather and organize to oppose violence. So I think it is important not to push out all these experiences of pain, of trauma. And I think this is very often, I think people experienced also during 2015, where there was kind of this, a lot of info about this pain and violence that Europe also produces. And we can see that now, that after this whole idea of compassion and solidarity vanished, that we cannot see the trauma anymore that is happening right now, for example, on the Greek islands, to really oppose the violence that is happening. And I think we also, in a holistic understanding, we need to find out how to tell these stories of violence and how to counter something that is called in German Traumaabwehr, so that people are trying or cannot face the trauma that is happening, that also our governments are responsible for, because it's really so invasive that we don't want to be disturbed in our so-called safe idea of living. But that we have to find places of mourning where we then can find the ideas of sensibility to oppose violence. So in this sense, we tried in many ways, and I'm trying to just come with one example that might not be the obvious one. I think the obvious one, when we talk about inclusion and activism and prevention in that sense of empowerment, because I think empowerment is prevention work, I would like to remind of a demonstration on the violence against queer people in Chechnya, where there was demonstration in Vienna in front of the parliament, with also people from the North Caucasus region that could not go public because it was too dangerous, but for them to know that people in Vienna and Europe are not silent and are standing up for supporting and being solidary with these people in the North Caucasus, was also quite an important message for people who are here, and also people who are in the different places, for example, in Russia. So for us, and I would like to finish here, the question of community is taking every little idea of inclusion, prevention, and activism on all different levels. And maybe to also reply to this question of what are the COVID challenges at the moment, is, as you can imagine, this question of isolation right now is a big one, also the question of mental health. But for us, I think in the first weeks, it was really important to get out the decisions and the new measurements from the government in, like what we did, 5 languages, in a language that can be understood, so people know what is going on, people can protect themselves, people know how to get, for example, their medication when they cannot leave the house or cannot go and see a doctor and stuff like that. And this as fast as possible. And so we know that people from queer base did not until now have any problems with police, which is very restrict against people in the public So especially when these kind of spaces are shrinking, it is very important to move to this idea of social care in even though there's physical distance. So I think this was quite of one of the challenges. But as we know, the queer community is, in the sense, also very keen with, very adaptive with social media, and is supporting each other in these different ways. So I hope I could give you a little insight of the work we do. This is just a little excerpt, and I hope to see you again, maybe in the Villa Garden as you see here. And yeah, take care, and thank you for listening.